Welcome to the OmniGamersClub podcast, the podcast about games on all platforms, including playing games on two ends of a long coffee shop table. I'm Mark Uesa.
And I am Daniel Winter. Yeah.
Long time no see.
Yes, yeah. We spent up yesterday at a coffee shop to play some games. Unfortunately, only after our TTRPG group fell through to some very impromptu illnesses. Speaking of illnesses, we have been a couple of weeks without an episode. So we had some family in town, some illnesses. So I decided to take a break during the Halloween season. Lots of other things to be enjoying, obviously. So coming back with another playlist.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, scheduling issues meant our Laser and Feelings plant episode never entirely came to fruition. We have another game lined up as a next feature, but in the meantime, lots of other stuff we've both been playing.
For sure, yeah. I knew it would be probably too ambitious to try and get a second RPG session happening when the first one is not exactly working out. So here we are. But we do have a game plan for next week. So
yes. More on that later. Yeah.
To come. All right. So, of course, we're doing our playlist episode. We're going to talk about news to us and games that we've been playing. Do you want to start us off, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, it feels a little frivolous talking about news right now with all of the very real news happening. We're recording right on the eve of the American elections. And by the time you're listening to this, we'll know just how screwed things are down there. Unfortunately, we're going to feel the effects up here, but I just want to say that we are thinking of all of our friends down in the States, especially those in minorities and vulnerable in varying ways. It can feel a little bit. It can feel a bit silly talking about games and fun, right? But I just thought it'd be a nice reminder to, like, sometimes we get a little too focused on the cardboard and the plastic on the table, and so I think sometimes it's best. It's good to have a reminder to look up and talk about the people on the other side of the table, the people behind the games, and humanize the hobby a little more. So I didn't want to go on a huge soapbox there, but I don't know if you had anything to add. But hey, I think it's politics all the way down. I'm not one to try and avoid no politics in my game.
Yeah, I try not to say too much about American politics because I'm not American. Whatever I say can't really sway the direction of how things are going. Sure, I feel for many friends and people that I've met in the industry. We met so many nice people when we were having that game day down in Bellingham recently. So of course, we wish the best for them. And I think games are really important because they help us, get through the day, right? So whatever feelings you have about how the election goes, how politics are going in your life, hopefully games can bring a little bit of brightness to your day or week, or give you something to look forward to.
Yeah, games are just there to facilitate interacting with our friends, right? Even solo games. I mean, that's why we're here, right? Talking about the games that we've played and comparing our experiences. So, games are just another way to bring humanity together. Hey, not to be all high-minded about it, but if you'll excuse a very crass segue, speaking once you've Pokemon gone to the polls, I think you've got a little Pokemon news there.
Yeah, that was absolutely terrible segue, but I'll try and salvage it. So, I signed up for something a while back. It was like one of those game beta things, and it just showed up on my phone one day, and I was like, "What is this?" So it's the Pokemon TCG. I think it's called Pokemon Trading Card Game Pocket. It's the app form. So I guess finally came out of beta, or maybe it is still in beta. I'm not sure. Just showed up on my phone because I pre-registered for it. And what it is it's based on that age-old game that has existed for a while, which my kids have been collecting cards for a long time. Those cards are just like littering my house, literally, just like behind every corner of every shelf. A card will pop up here and there. But about this particular app, it seems to be mostly targeted at the kind of collectability of the cards, as you might imagine. There's going to be shinies and holographics and things like that. So that's definitely there. It sort of reminds me of the Topps trading card apps that were popular like years ago. that have been around for years. I used to follow the Topps, what is it, Star Wars trading card game?
Mm.
Or it's not even a game, it's just a trading card app. You open packs and you collect the packs and you try and create sets. And this feels very much like that, but it promises that there's actually a game component to it. And I only just recently was able to access that part of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's quite separated out. Basically, the only thing you can do to start with is collect the cards, and it's very much gacha loot box style. Basically, you get free booster pack unlocks every, I think like one every 24 hours or two every 24
Huh.
hours, and you can pay like little gems
Of course,
to speed up the
yeah.
clock, right? And of course, they give you a bunch of free gems to start, so you're like click 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 unlock, and now I have about just over 100 cards, 130 cards, something like that, and I'm at level 6, whatever that means. And now you can play the card game solo against bots.
Mm.
So at some point you're going to collect enough cards that you can create decks, and this was a little bit hidden for a while there, so you have to complete this like quite tedious tutorial to even play solo against bots. And so I completed this like 10-step tutorial, and then finally I was allowed to play a solo match. And it's a cut down version of that TCG, which is already a fairly simplistic game. Instead of, I think, 60 cards, you play with 20 cards, and none of them are the sort of the energy / mana cards that you might expect. Those sort of just happen magically behind the scenes. So
Interesting. Yeah.
the 20 cards you choose are going to be items, they're going to be supporters, and they're going to be, of course, Pokemon, the standard ones, basics, and evolutions. So I think the cards are pretty much standard. Like they seem to be one-to-one accurate
Yeah, I was
to
going to
the
say, because
card game.
curiously, you're playing with the actual cards from the TCG, but the game you're playing is completely different.
It
It's
is not completely different.
oh, okay. There is some
It is
similarities.
like a cut down version.
Okay.
I would say it's like 60 to 80% fidelity to what the TCG would be.
Mm.
So it seems to me that you win if you defeat 3 of the opponent's Pokemon.
Hmm.
And I think that the win condition is typically if you defeat 6 of their Pokemon.
I know there have been some efforts to simplify that game, even in physical products. There's been a couple of releases
Hmm.
that have been a stripped down version as an introductory product. So, I mean, exploitative practices aside, I am interested in to see how they simplify the
Yeah,
game and bring in new audiences.
it does seem to go fast. Like I was not blown away by the very intro solo matches I was having, but of course they're meant to be tutorials, so I get that. But they went pretty fast. I think they're basically trying to go for the not Pokemon Snap, the Marvel Snap
Yeah, yeah.
market. And I think a little while ago, even Yu-Gi-Oh had a sort of a faster version. I think Duel somethings compared to their full size
Hmm.
TCG games that they've been putting out for a while. So I'm not gonna put my put a review out for this app yet, but I'll keep trying it, and maybe I can convince you to try it out. And there does seem to be PvP. I haven't tried it yet. I don't know if that's real time or if it's like my real time versus your virtual.
Like Marvel Snap, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
virtual opponents. Yeah, interesting.
Right.
Obviously, Pokemon has a huge amount of content to pull upon. So I'm not sure how much is in this base version of the game, but there's certainly a rich source of cards to pull from.
Yeah. So for what I've been able to see, I can only pull from one set. I don't know
Mm.
if this set is accurate to anything that's out there in the market right now, but I imagine that there's space for many other sets. So there's probably going to be shifting types of varieties of cards available. And yeah, I imagine they could do a lot of stuff with this engine.
Cool. Yeah, well, my daughter's just entering the sort of peak Pokemon age, so very curious I'm keeping my eye out for sort of options to get into that if she's interested. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's pretty gentle lift. I mean, I imagine this is designed to be partially a tool for people to learn how to actually play the game.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll do that.
Excellent. Well, one bit of news I wanted to mention was that I've spoken a little bit recently about video game preservation, like especially in the context of UFO 50 or some of the more actual real life, if it's like Atari 50. Uh, Curiously, there's been an example of preservation in the board game realm, though. Kurt Vonnegut, famed author, and he died as part of his estate. There was found some game design notes, a game that he designed in like the 50s, and had basically been shelved as not marketable. But recently, those notes have been sourced and put together into a final game that is GHQ. And so Geoff Engelstein, who I know has done various podcasts and written books on game design, has put this together and sort of, I guess, done some development work to modernize it a little bit, but as largely as possible left it. There you go. I've been looking for his books for a while now. Hard to get hold of. Mark has one for those listening in. So yeah, this game has just been released by his own sort of publishing house, I believe, and includes like a bunch of design notes, like of Kurt Vonnegut's like original design notes. So as this a historical object, I thought that was really fascinating. It plays like a kind of like a variant on chess, but with a modern military theme with various, like it's like an 8x8 grid, and there's various types of units that you're trying to attack each other. But there was an interesting podcast that I was listening to from Liz Davidson of Beyond Solitaire, talking to Geoff about the history and the development of that game, if you're interested. So yeah, that's a fascinating case study, I thought.
Yeah, for sure. It's rare when you hear about a game that's sort of brought back to life.
Mm.
I mean, of course, there's games like Restoration Games, the
Mm.
publisher, but they're all recreating games that like existed as retail products. This one never saw the light of day as a retail product, so it's sort of clutched from the jaws of death or unlife and then released upon the world. So that's a fascinating story for sure. I follow Geoff Engelstein's podcast in the past. Of course, he's very famous for doing ludology for years, and I think he did the GameTek
That rings a
bit
bell. Yeah.
on the what
The
was
Dice
it?
Tower, I
The
think it was.
Dice Tower podcast
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
even before that time, and he actually has a decent game design newsletter that you can follow.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
go check that out.
Very
if you
much
haven't
in the
seen it.
weeds of like maths and statistics. I find it a little dry. I can't quite process it. But if that's your jam, it's there's a lot of info there.
Yeah, for sure. I have to be in a particular mood to read through
Yes.
those because
Yeah.
they're quite cerebral for sure.
Need your coffee.
Yeah, but this book actually that I showed you a moment ago is actually quite an easy read because it's very like itemized. It's very atomic. So it's called this book that I was gifted by my former podcast host, Mark Ellis, Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design by Geoff Engelstein and Isaac Shalev is actually great. It's sort of like as a dictionary of game mechanics. So you can sort of see all the game mechanics, how they work, and they have like references as to the games that use those mechanics. So just a really brilliant, just kind of reference book and quite easy to read.
Very cool, but more
Thumbs
for
up.
like people who are looking to design their own games, right? It's not much, not so much an academic sort of history or.
I think it could be interesting to people that want to know about the theory and the history behind certain game mechanisms, how they came about, because it sort of is like a bibliography of where these mechanics came from.
Very cool. Okay. Well, I think that's it for me today. Do you have any other news you want to cover?
Not much news here. Just a reminder that November, which started recently for us, is apparently, among many things, it is Mothership Month.
Yes.
And I excitedly looked on BackerKit or wherever they're doing it, Kickstarter, and I didn't find anything, so I was a bit surprised. Turns out that Mothership Month starts on the 12th of the month. So that's why I didn't see anything. I'm starting to see some buzz popping up on Blue Sky here and there of creators. I'm cautiously optimistic. Like I told you before, Daniel, I don't have any of the physical Mothership zines or material. So mostly I'm looking for that. But if anything else is super compelling, I wouldn't mind looking closer too. So that should be hitting pretty much, soon after this episode goes out.
Yeah, I think we spoke a little bit about that last episode. I recently played my first game of Mothership. Go and listen to our previous playlist. And I am quite interested. I will likely use this as an opportunity to grab that core Mothership rulebook. But I do still feel a little fatigue over the thought of like 24 different backer kit campaigns going on at once. I noticed I learnt yesterday that backer kit has a hype train now, as in like if people keep backing it, then the end date of the campaign keeps getting pushed back, and it's just another example of the amount of work that it takes to keep track of each individual campaign these days. And I'm just tired, man. I don't know.
Yeah, that's why I said I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see actually how they pull this new campaign format off, if they do at
There
all.
will be some cool ideas in there, I'm sure, and some really excellent designers and projects. I just wish there was a easier way to sort it outside of this little window, right?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it turns out.
Especially when that window is moving and you don't know what the end date is.
Sure. All right. That's all I wanted to say in terms of the news. Should we talk about games we've been playing?
Absolutely. There's plenty of those. So, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. So I recently, I might have mentioned in the past that I booted up this sort of unknown to me where it came from, but it's this MMO, free to play MMO called Throne and Liberty, and
That's right.
it's from NC Soft, which I am
Mm.
not certain if that's Korean. I played some games that they put out before, so it's a free to play MMO. I wasn't expecting a lot. But I was surprised by certain aspects of this. First of all, the story is not much to write home about, and there's some pretty annoying bits. Like there's this annoying mascot character. So that little fairy in Link,
Oh,
Legend of
Navi?
Zelda.
Yeah.
Yeah, Navi. Navi is annoying. Obviously,
Hey,
everyone hates
listen.
Navi. Exactly. But imagine Navi that had unnecessary limbs and always yammered in like baby talk and had facial expressions
All the more limbs to get your attention.
and was floating next to the main character's face like for every scene, and that's just one annoying aspect of the game, and that mascot doesn't serve any purpose, by the way. So that's one definite downside to that game. But some other parts of it are surprisingly effective. First of all, it looks beautiful. The game world looks beautiful. The initial area is quite large, and I don't know what they're doing with like RAM optimization or something like that, but they have like these really seamless like camera transitions from like across the entire countryside, like
Hmm.
something that games like I don't know, like Bethesda games could only wish they could accomplish.
Are there only mountains you
And
can see and walk to?
yeah, you all of the scenery, these massively detailed cities, and they're doing a lot with like cinematic storytelling. So the story's bunk, but the storytelling engine is quite strong.
Okay.
Like the
Like good
nameless
performances?
characters, good
Hmm.
performances for the most part. The character models are attractive. All of them are like lip synced effectively. They're fully voiced, and the camera angles are quite cinematic too.
Hmm.
Even in what would be normally boring, kind of talking head dialogue scenes where they're just exposition dumping or giving you quests or whatever, really basic stuff. They have these like swooping camera angles, keeping things interesting. And I just got to say, like, just the seamless transitions between inside and outside, large landscape, and then tiny buildings inside of pirate ships, things that you've seen before, but without any of the like long load times and awkward transitions. Like just everything seems to be like tightened and smoothed and polished. And so just for production quality, I think it's really, really notable
Interesting.
that I wish some more larger Western studios kind of picked up and noticed what some of these other developers from other countries are doing with their engines and their technology.
I mean, so many
So
MMOs and
pretty
even
impressive.
like other RPGs, like Bioware games, are all just so shot, reverse shot, talking heads dialogue,
Right.
right? So it's fun to see MMOs playing with something a little more dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of BioWare, of course, the brand new Dragon Age is coming out, and I'm feeling
Mm.
very jealous of everyone playing that. I don't know. I can't afford to drop, you know, the money for a full price game the moment it comes out, though.
Yeah, I've forgotten everything that happened in Inquisition. I could just replay that.
Yeah, I don't think a lot happens in Inquisition except with that, that one guy.
I just remember
You know what I'm
the
talking
the
about.
Eggman. Yeah.
Yeah, right at that scene, that after credit scene, right? Everyone
Hmm.
watched that, I hope. Anyways, that game is piquing my interest. Throne and Liberty, if you want to check it out, it's free to play, and it's on consoles like Xbox Series X. It runs great, looks great.
Very cool. Well, I've been continuing to wrap up some big games from earlier in the year, closing up on Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, getting there. I continue to find a lot of the so much busy work and repetitive quests that feel a little redundant in that game. But on the other hand, I'm catching up on a lot of my YouTube backlog. So it's very handy for multitasking there. I did find like at the very end there was a surprise final area that I wasn't expecting that is acting as a really cool victory lap of some of bringing together a lot of the side quests and areas into one sort of package in some really interesting ways. So I mean, closing it on the end there, and when that game has the momentum of the story and the scale of the verticality and traveling up and down, it's really strong. At its best, it's really thrilling. It's just a lot of filler, unfortunately, that I can't rip myself away from. So trying to not get into in the weeds there. But one game I did finish was I returned to Still Wakes the Deep. So this is a horror game, came out a few months ago from the Chinese Room, I believe it's called, who made Dear Esther and Amnesia 2, I think it was. One of the Amnesia games. Primarily known as a walking simulator studio. And this game isn't entirely different from that. You are on a Scottish oil rig in the 1970s. So it's very specific time and place. It's really richly designed, like all the aesthetics and level design. It's like super detailed. And I did one of those games that I really take my time in exploring every nook and cranny at the start of the game, partly just to want to see all the detail, and partly to avoid getting to the scary bits. Really studying those cans of beans on the shelf, right? Accents, really strong Scottish accents here. I won't grace you all with my terrible attempts at those, but it is interesting that the default subtitles translate those into like the American versions. You really don't need to know that gobshite means idiot. So I prefer like do go into the subtitles and change those settings so you actually know what they're saying and get the full Scottish flavor. In terms of what happens when you actually get to the scary stuff, though, not to spoil anything, it's tinged with very much sort of color out of space, Lovecraftian vibes, a little bit of The Thing, perhaps. Very good tentacle physics, I will say. Very cool sort of mist, a lot of mist and rolling waves and the light coming through the mist and really cool atmospheric vibes. So, as I said, great setting, sense of place, time. Unfortunately, it kind of runs out of ideas in terms of the actual mechanics. It plays a little bit like Soma in terms of when you're actually coming up to a monster, it's largely just very sort of limited arenas. Like every so often, you'll come across an arena with a monster, and you've got to come across some kind of rules to navigate that space, get to the side, pull a lever, and continue. So it's very sort of siloed. The horror elements are very siloed.
So
And
how long is this game?
that's 6 hours, and that's partly because I was dying a few times. And unfortunately, it's one of those games where like dying kind of really sands down the effectiveness of the horror, right? It's a really fine balance to you want to feel like you just got by the skin of your teeth, but not have to repeat the same segment over and over again. So it did run a little long. As I said, there's only so many times you can come across a really messed up body, and the protagonist says, "Oh shite!" It's like, okay, yeah, it's messed up. Like I've seen it. Like it's like all the other bodies. I would have liked them to perhaps humanize some of these monsters you come across a little bit because spoilers. It's largely your former colleagues that are transformed in various ways. And hey, it's a walking simulator. Embrace it. Maybe at least give me some like audio logs or letters to like humanize and like who are these dudes and like why are they projecting their trauma. It feels very much the dudes that would rather be transformed into hideous beasts and kill their former colleagues, then go to therapy. That's very much the theme here, but you don't know these characters well enough for that to really come across. And there was some, like, at the beginning, there's some cool sub themes of like unionization and exploitation that are kind of dropped by the wayside by the end. So it largely ended up just being creepy tentacle monster chases by the end. But very cool setting and atmosphere if that's your jam.
Yeah, I am intrigued by this game. It definitely caught my eye too. I haven't played it, but there's something about an oil rig that is always instantly captivating to me.
Mm.
It's like a artificial land or like a space station, right?
Very
It's
much
just it's
bottled, right? Like there's
yeah,
no
it's
escape.
on Earth, right? But it's distinct from the mainland. Yeah,
Mm.
I like that a lot. So maybe it's since Metal Gear Solid 2 or whatever, I was something is attractive about an oil rig. That's cool. Okay, I'll tell you about another game I've been playing a little bit more. I rented
Mm.
Xenoblade Chronicles 1 again from the library. I'm playing some more of that, and I'm kind of at odds with this game. I know that you've beaten it, I
Yes.
believe. And there's some good things about it, but then this game is also like quite mid. Like it just looks like hot garbage and it doesn't run that great. And the story is pretty meh. And the combat is super, super repetitive. And you know that like row of attack options that you have? There's something like 8 attack options or 8 or 10
Yeah, it's quite a lot
that
to manage
are
there.
horizontal. Why didn't they just map them to the buttons? Like an MMO. Why didn't they just map the left 4 to your left 4 buttons and the right 4 to your right 4
It is
buttons?
trying very hard to be an MMO.
But like failing. Like I just
Mm.
spend so much time moving through that nav bar rather than actually triggering the attack that I want to,
Mm.
even when I know what attack I want to trigger. So I'm kind of losing faith in this game and I don't know if I should complete it or not.
I will say the story gets more interesting. Spoiler: the people you think are the baddies are not the baddies.
Well, yeah.
It layers. It just keeps adding more and more layers as you go on that game, and it does get more interesting. But it's a very long game. Again, a lot of filler, typical of those JRPGs. I did find
Yeah.
that sense of scale in those levels very fun. Like you're literally climbing on the back of a dead god, and like you're working your way up through the body, and you like seeing the scale of the world. It's a very cool sense of
Yeah,
place.
the world building is certainly the best part of that game. So I'm holding out hope for that. And I guess I'll just quickly transition into another RPG I've been playing. I'm sort of in an RPG mood, maybe you can tell. While I've been on the exercise bike, I'm kind of taking a break from Path of Exile. So I've been playing another Path game. This time it's Octopath Traveler 2,
Mm. Mhm.
which is on Xbox Game Pass. I never really played this game extensively. I kind of started it and gave up. I started with the, I guess the kind of the wild girl, like the
Same, yeah.
jungle character.
Always go for the archer.
Yeah, exactly. And that setup was sort of ho hum. And then I
Yeah.
finally went to someplace else in the world and met my second character, who is the apothecary
Hmm.
was the one I went
Interesting.
for. And learning about her story and playing through her prologue, I guess, because that's the format of this game. And it didn't really click for me that was the structure of the game. I knew that there were these 8 characters and you had to play through them, but I didn't know how that they were going to link them together. And having seen how they linked them together, I think it was really effective. And it's kind of a cool way, in a very kind of like tabletop RPG way, to be introduced to these characters by seeing their backstories and cutting away to their origin stories and bringing them together and meeting in an interesting situation. And instantly, now that I have more than one character in my party, just the tactical options are
Mm.
increased manyfold. And I'm starting to see that, yeah, this game could really, dig its claws into me, excusing the pun, and be a lot more engaging than the really really basic simplified RPG that it was at the start. So it seems great. It runs great, obviously, on the next gen systems, and perfect for a little bite size taste of RPG while I'm on the exercise bike, which is typically when I play it.
Yeah, I played a little bit of this. I bounced off the first one, but I heard that the second one improves upon it in every way. So
Right.
I played a little bit just before my vacation, so kind of lost momentum. I also played that character, felt it was a little light. Hadn't gotten to the second character though to see how that uh, changes things up. But it is a very slow start in terms of it's 8 characters and they all have their own tutorial. So it's like 8 different tutorials that you got to go through. But I think you can skip them and maybe come back to some of those later. So the
Yeah.
pacing is a little fiddly, but once you get those characters together and interacting in different ways, I'm sure it picks up from there. So
Yeah.
I have any meaning to get back to this.
Yeah, it was quite cool how I saw that option when you're introduced to the new character. Like you said, they do give you the option to do the backstory or not and
Mm.
skip through it. And I did do the backstory because I was just curious. And it showcased how the special ability of the character differs. So the apothecary obviously has the ability to utilize healing equipment in a unique way, and the hunter has the ability to capture animals. So I feel like probably wouldn't utilize those if I wasn't introduced to them to see how that
Yeah,
they play
yeah.
out. And
Seeing the
I think that's
situational effectiveness. Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty effective the way that they introduce those. So I appreciate it. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep playing it.
interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
How about yourself?
bouncing off of Still Wakes the Deep, I wanted to keep that horror train going and decided to pick up Resident Evil 4. So this is the remake that came out, I think it was either late last year or early this year. I tried the original game a couple of times and bounced off of those tank controls pretty quickly. It's a struggle to get through, but I have since played through quite a few of the other games. I played through 7, 8, and the remake of 2, so somewhat more familiar with the Resident Evil oeuvre now. And yeah, having a great time. It plays as you'd expect a modern third-person shooter to play. I can't really compare it to the original explicitly. It's been too long, but it's a very smooth running game. It doesn't really feel that different from my experience of the other Resident Evil games. The perhaps the most interesting part is that it's a little more of an ensemble in that you have a companion for a large part of the game. They don't do a whole lot, I will say. It would have been nice if they had more interaction, like even like The Last of Us, where you've got characters throwing items to you, or learning to like the Atreus shooting enemies as a stun, for example. I'm having fun with that. It's very camp. Like Resident Evil, like plays itself as very moody, but it's also incredibly camp. It reminds me a lot of like sort of John Carpenter, who's known as like this super existential, like creepy work like The Thing, but also has the most campy stuff like They Live, for example. So it balances those two halves pretty well, I think. Lots of puns. But I'm about halfway through that. So again, it's not really doing anything different from the previous Resident Evil games from what I've seen, but it's a good time.
Yeah, Resident Evil 4 always has like an outsized reputation as being a really influential
Mm.
action game, like a 3D action game. Like they credit it with popularizing the cover-based shooter mechanics in later games like even Gears of War. And I can't speak towards whether
There's no
that
cover in this
influence is
version,
true or not.
so.
Yeah. Oh, that's odd. Maybe
Mm.
maybe I misheard that one. But yeah, Resident Evil 4 is a nut that I haven't been able to crack, despite the fact that I played all of the early Resident Evils before it and pretty extensively, and not so much the newer ones, but I did play 5. And 5, which is pretty much thought of as generally the worst, next or tied with 6.
Much more action
Um,
oriented, 5 and 6. I'm
yeah,
led to
5
believe.
is
Yeah.
actually I thought it was okay. Like the world building was sort of terrible, but the partner character in that game was actually the partner game was very strong. Like
Mm.
there's times when you play as each other, you help each other out. and you're with each other through most of the game, which maybe some people complained because it's less scary when you're together. It's more scary as a horror. The horror is more present when you're solitary, I suppose,
I mean, I
through
will
a
say
bulk of the game.
4 isn't that scary. It's much more of a power fantasy than 7 and 8 that I've played. Like the way you can level up your guns pretty easily and just constantly stream of ammo and grenades and things. It's not. There haven't been any dogs jumping at me through windows or anything like that yet. So it's pretty light on the jump scares and the actual horror vibes. It's more of a run, not quite a run and gun, but definitely has a good sense of power progression.
Yeah, Resident Evil's always been pulled in two directions. It's like
Mm.
the indie horror movie side or like the Hollywood blockbuster action movie side, and I feel like it doesn't lie exactly in one camp or the other. It has to
Yeah.
share qualities of both. How effective that is, it's hard to say. But yeah, I'll definitely want to try Resident Evil 4 too.
Excellent. Well, shall we jump to the tabletop?
Yeah, let's do it. Speaking of tabletop, thanks for lending me the issue of Weird Science.
Yes.
I did spend some time today on Lazy Sunday reading through the horror episode, the
Excellent.
horror volume of that. Quite some good articles there, and it's mostly covering TTRPGs, but it was nice to sort of get me in the mood just shortly following Halloween there.
Yeah, I've read through a couple of issues of that now. Lots of great articles exploring some of the niche side areas of the TTRPG hobby outside of just D&D and the culture around the hobby. It certainly put a lot more things on my buy list, I will say.
Yeah, it's nice to read a magazine too. It's a blast from the past.
Mm.
As someone who lived in the analog days. Um, all right, shall we talk board games then? You want to start us off?
Yeah, I've been playing a little bit with my daughter the last few weeks. She's really into dexterity games. We played a lot of Animal Upon Animal and Crash Octopus. That's the one. You've look the flicking game, right? So I on a whim found Nekojima at our local game store and thought she'd be into that. So this is a dexterity game where you are basically sorry, let me set the scene here. You've got these wooden dowels, like rods, two rods with a string between them, and you have to place these two rods on a board so that the string is sort of swinging down, but not touching any other strings that are already on the board. And so you've soon got these dozens of dowels spread around and these intersecting strings that you're trying to intertwine between each other. And then on occasion, you also have to hang cats on the strings. I think the idea is like it's a cat island in Japan that's like overrun with electrical wires, and the cats are running along the electrical wires. And so it's the theme's a little light and silly, but hey, my daughter loves cats and she likes dexterity games, so we've been having a blast with that. It is very tricky because I mean it's more in the Jenga sense of dexterity games where one wrong move and the game's over, as opposed to the flicking dexterity, which each action is kind of mutually exclusive from each other. And so there is some frustration there, I will say, but it also at the same time has one of the coolest moments of destruction because these wires are all intersecting. The moment one of them falls, they all just sort of collapse in on each other in this really satisfying way. So hey, even when you lose, this game is fun. You can play it cooperatively and competitively, if that's of interest. So I've been playing cooperatively with my daughter mostly, just to avoid any frustration there. But yeah, it's the sense of victory is more like you've got several tiers of like how many pieces you've played. So it has a good sense of progression. Oh, we made it to level 2. Oh, we've made it to level 3, and so we're gradually working our way up the difficulty scale there. So if you're into dexterity games, it's very fine. It's got a great gimmick factor, right? You can stack the dowels on top of each other if you're feeling really risky. Yeah, enjoying Nekojima.
Nice. Yeah, I like some dexterity games like Animal Upon Animal. I feel like that got us through the early days of the pandemic. It was really invaluable there to bring the family together in times of separation. But I feel like it's hard for me to pull out dexterity games. I get to pull out game so rarely amongst my family that it has to, really satisfy, a game craving. And dexterity is not at the top of the list, but it certainly has a time and place, and great for the younger kids, obviously.
Yeah, those little hands can really reach in between the strings and in some really fine tuned ways. But it's good practice for the hand eye coordination, right?
Nice. Yeah, I didn't. I haven't played a lot of board games recently, but I thought should mention the one that you and I played
Mm,
yesterday. We played a couple games, of course, but one of them we're going to feature next episode. The other game that we ended up playing was a game that you kickstarted, I believe. It's called
yes,
Nawalli. Is that correct?
I think that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us the details? I don't know the designer, for instance, or
Yeah,
the background.
Gonzalo Alvarez, I believe, is the designer's name. So I heard about this on Shut Up and Sit Down podcast a year or two ago, and it was a very small independent Kickstarter game that I missed the window on. Very hard to find, obviously, but was excited that there was a second run of the Kickstarter early this year. A very quick turnaround, I will say. Only took a few months to fulfill. And so, yeah, very excited to finally have my hand on this and trying it. Also, I should describe it first, is that it's a two-player dueling game. A lane battler. We've talked about a few of those lately. It's basically 4 lanes. You can play a creature into each of those 4 lanes and opposing your opponent's lane. One creature facing one creature, and so on. The very cool theme, I will say, it's like an Aztec art style. So yeah, really cool graphic design of these sort of very cartoony Mesoamerican type creatures. They're all they're mostly animal or sort of Aztec mythology uh, entities, we'll say. And yeah, very, very cool graphic design. It's very complicated in terms of the abilities. Like all these creatures have like 20 different abilities or keywords they might have. So there's no like unique card text, but each character will have between 1 and 3 of these keywords. Like it's sort of like in Magic the Gathering, you've got flying or menace or haste, for example, and they all have some unique effect. Memorizing those I think, is going to make a big difference to how easy this game is going to be to learn. It was a bit. It was a bit of a learning curve, I will say. A couple of the interesting things about this is that there was basically there's card drafting at the start. You start with a sort of 5 card. Well, you have your one sort of guardian card, and then four cards go into your deck, and then you draft an additional 4 cards. You have 2 decks of 8 cards, 8 creatures, 8 spells. That's the entire game, and you draft half of those. I always love drafting, especially because your deck is so small. Every one of those drafted cards matters a whole lot, right? As opposed to drafting a 30-card Magic deck. The other key differentiating factor here is that it's got the victory condition, rather than sort of earning points or simply destroying your opponents. There's basically a tug of war system. There's 13 tokens in the center, and you need to have all 13 tokens to win the game. But if I attack you, I take your tokens and then any that are left over in the middle. And if you attack me, you steal my tokens, right? So real push and pull mechanic here. We haven't gotten a great feel, I don't think, for the dynamics of what that means, but it is very much a zero-sum game here. So there's some interesting things going on. What do you think?
Yeah, of course, we just played it the one time, so it's
Yeah.
hard to give a definitive opinion about this game. I will agree that the artwork and the graphic design of this game is quite lovely. Mostly the artwork. The graphic design, I would say, is serviceable. There's basically these little like dots with very subtle patterns that will tell you what is the cost and the energy and the power and
Having to
defense and
count
that
8
sort of thing.
dots, and like rather than typing a numeral 8, having to count 8 dots. Is that 7 or is that
Right.
8? And that's a little fiddly.
Right. That was a little bit fiddly, but sort of went with the theme that's sort of the ancient,
Mm.
very simplistic artwork. And I appreciated that they used those colorful icons to represent the 20 powers. Didn't appreciate that it had to basically be face down in the reference card that explained each one of the 20 powers in tiny brief text. After we played it for a while, I think we got into the groove of it a little bit more.
Mm.
And some of
Mm.
the powers, are just like direct, in direct opposition to each other. One is like the same effect offensively, and the other is the same effect defensively. So it's just an inverse of each other. So once you get those core concepts down, it gets a little bit smoother. I thought it was a little bit fiddly with a lot of steps that I would have liked to have seen smoothed over a bit more. But the core of it was quite enjoyable. I mean, I like a two-player dueling game. It did that fairly well. And I didn't love the tug of war of the gem system, but I think just the size of the decks themselves acts more of a game clock to ensure that the speed or the length of the total match wouldn't be too long. So the match, it felt just about right, the game length of it, and it ended up being pretty close. And I think like there was some fiddly bits with the production quality as well, like the game mats, which you told me were optional, felt sort of superfluous. Like for instance, you lay them like end to end, and like the colors don't line up, nor would they, because they're sort of,
my blue
they're,
lane is your black lane, and so
exactly.
yeah.
Like, so sort of like the reasoning behind those colors didn't make much sense. And it provides you with these like really small polished stones, which feel nice to
Actual
act as
obsidian,
your,
apparently.
yeah, exactly, actual stones to serve as your sort of damage counters and your money essentially. But because they're real stones, some of them are just like these microscopic
Very
slivers.
different sizes, yeah. I have to
Yeah,
like weed out some of the smaller ones.
yeah, you should just like throw those out. Like those
Hmm.
will get lost or go into your food or something like that. Just watch out for those. But I'm nitpicking. Overall, like promising game mechanisms here, and great for a small shop. And the art is just fantastic.
There's a lot of character who's gone into this game. The rules, there are some rules ambiguities. It's a very like, tiny little thin rule book. A few of the terms aren't sort of clearly defined, especially with 20 different abilities that are interacting and bouncing off of each other. I do need a little bit of clarity there, but once you're in it, I think it's really fun. It struggles from the same sense of Magic the Gathering, right? You kind of need at least one player to be really familiar with the rules. If two players who don't know what they're doing, sort of just poking and prodding at the game, you don't really get a full sense of the dynamics and how they're optimally going to play out. So I think it's going to take a couple more games to really get a feel for this. But there's absolutely some friction, some fiddliness here, but I think that's where a lot of the character comes from as well. So I have a little more patience these days for games being like not being super polished, just for that's where the character is drawn out of that friction. So yeah, very much looking excited to dive back into more of this. Not only because it reminds me a lot of some of the mechanics in Inscription, one of my favorite video games. There was a card game in that was very similar with that sort of tug of war lane battling.
Yep, and it's very portable. It's a small little package.
Yeah,
So yeah, a good filler game. I mean, I would definitely try it again for sure.
absolutely. Well, let's do that.
Great. All right. Other board games you've been playing?
I think I'm going to leave it there so we don't run too long.
All right. All right. Let's move into the other side of the tabletop games. Some role-playing games. You want to tell us about some role-playing games you might have
Sure.
played?
Yeah, I've been continuing my solo journaling odyssey in the TTRPG scene. I picked up a couple more games. I will say I went back following our previous episode. I ran back to Rain City to beat you to the Cloud Empress book.
Smart. I would have done that too.
So excited to jump into that sometime, and we should look at getting a group together. But yeah, I have a few solo games I've been looking at in the meantime, and so I've showed this off previously, but I've now played it. That is Old Morris Cave, aka 1,000-Year-Old Campfire. So despite the it has some lineage with 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, but it's actually a completely different game. There's no writing, no journaling, no text. You don't have to be creative in any way at all in this game, really. So if that's a sticking point for you, there's no pressure to be creative in this game. It's basically an archaeology simulator. So it's very scientific in that sense. You're actually making a historical strata for a site over 1,000 years. I'll show you a quick picture here if for those listening to video. So this is what I came up with. basically the different the layers of sort of dirt and artifacts accumulating over the years and holes being dug down into them, for example. Um, Despite the very scientific nature of the procedure, it does draw a really fascinating degree of poetry and sort of humanity out of that. So, like the way that the story is being told over time, the passage of time itself being a story, right? So holes being dug down and destroying previous layers. So each layer is basically managed through flowcharts. Like you roll a dice and you'll get a random flowchart for that layer. And that might be the flowchart might be a straight line. Like you might have four nodules on a straight line that's telling a very straightforward story of a bird flying into the cave and dying, but told in a very flowing way that's sort of presenting that story through time. Then you've got these really elaborate flowcharts. You might get trapped in rolling dice, and I literally got caught in a loop rolling a dice that I wasn't able to escape from this looping flowchart, which in itself tells a sort of the passage of time and monotony of generations of deer living and dying in this cave. Until you could keep rolling the dice until you escape, or you could just say, "Hey, I get the point," and move on, right? But there was quite a surprisingly amount of variety in the types of experiences you come across. I saw like a quarter of some of the flowcharts in this game. Is a lot of different stories to be told through here and the way they interact over the eons. So yeah, it's a really fascinating mix of sort of scientific process and sort of contemplative poetry over time. So yeah, if you don't want to think too much in terms of creative writing, but still want to experience a something sort of thoughtful and telling a story, like narrative, the narrative does come through here. I find you don't have to come up with it yourself. It sort of self emerges from time.
Nice. Um, Speaking of zines, this is a product that I was telling you about the other day, but I didn't happen to bring it with us when we met for coffee yesterday. But it's called Rogue Zone. So this is a product
Yes.
I have a PDF for, which is in full color, quite beautiful, just fantastic artwork. But you can see here from this black and white printout, it's by Rogue Zone by Skragend, like Gend, and it's totally different thematically from what you just described. It's basically like Borderlands, the RPG. It's one or two player GM less, and the gameplay loop of it is basically you create your characters. And then you go into the exclusion zone. You fight monsters, and you get loot. You get loot, and you come back to town, and then you sell stuff, and then you level up. You rinse and repeat. And I am, obviously a big fan of Borderlands, the series. I think you enjoy them as well.
I'm a big fan of
And
exclusion zones.
big fan of exclusion zones and big fan of mutants and loot. So, what
Hmm.
what is there? There's nothing to complain about here. I'm gonna spend a little time I guess stapling and cutting up this into my own little zine for myself, just a little handicraft. And I'm watching some YouTube videos about putting RPG zine printouts together by hand. It's very nerdy, but it brings me a little bit of pleasure to get my hands on. So I'm really looking forward to playing that as well. That's called Rogue Zone by Srag End. You can get that on I got it on Drive Through RPG.
Cool. Yeah, I think you've talked about this on the podcast before, and I'm definitely interested to check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, it combines a few things that I'm really interested in, like the hex crawl system. So it's got a
Mm.
built-in hex map that I've printed out separately, and that's why I kind of appreciate having the PDF, because I can kind of like hack it and print it out in an order that I prefer. And it also has the kind of OSR feel, the old school revival. It's very lethal. So you create, simplified characters, and you basically just spit them out there into a challenge, and maybe they might die, but that's okay, because we're just having a light, gentle loot crawl here. almost
Yeah,
like a
I'm
video
not
game.
familiar with hex crawl systems. I think Cloud Empress actually uses something similar to that as well. I have no frame of reference for how that operates though. So,
Yeah, I haven't played them myself, but they do seem really intriguing. Just the concept of traveling across the entire countryside and
hmm,
randomly moving from this area to that area and then encountering this type of peoples or this type of terrain.
much grander
It's,
sense of space, right?
yeah, like the traveling and the exploring becomes part of the game, not just, bespoke scenarios that the GM prepares for you. And that works really well with solo games because you kind of create the story as you go. So
Hmm,
I'm eager to try that out, for instance.
very cool. Okay.
But in a totally different angle from that, I started my CyberPunk Red campaign.
Oh,
So
excellent.
this is the campaign that I'm playing with my neighbors. I'm not GMing this time. I'm just a player. I'm playing a netrunner, very kind of like stereotypical, like kind of stoic Japanese samurai, but in the future. And my bushido is in the form of net running, basically, and I have to bring honor back to my family, who has been betrayed by um,
Follow the
uh,
code.
some sort of corporate rival. Right. So that's my character. And I've been a fan of Cyberpunk for a while, mostly in the form of playing games like Shadowrun. So I've never tried Cyberpunk before, but of course I've dipped my toes into the video game world, so I know a little bit
Hmm.
about it. So I was eager to try this. We played 2 sessions now, and it's shaping up pretty well. Pretty much what I expected. It's a lot more similar to D&D than I thought it would
Hmm.
be. Like it's a
Interesting.
lot closer to D&D than say Shadowrun is, or any of these other later Powered by the Apocalypse games that I've been playing lately. It's very much about the gear that you choose to load yourself up with and the skills that you choose to train yourself up with. So it's kind of very stat driven. The dice mechanism is really interesting though. It's basically, instead of a D20, it's D10 based rolls.
Hmm.
So you add your skill to your attribute to your dice roll. And on a D10, of course, there's fewer potential results, but the highest value is still a crit, and the lowest value is still a crit fail. So, like some other games, if you roll a 10, you can roll again and add that result to your
Oh.
10.
Mm-hmm.
So you could get, roll 2 or 3 10s in a row and just have a number that blows the results out of the water. And of course, you can get a surprisingly effective result out of that particular roll. But when you roll a critical fail, you actually roll the d10 again, and you subtract that value from
Hmm.
your result. So not only did you roll a 1, you might roll a negative 10
And
on
once you
top of
fail,
that.
it's really rubbing it in there, right?
Yeah, for sure. But like I thought, that's really swingy. It's a
Hmm.
10% chance of a critical failure or success. But when I thought about that, it's a 10% chance of a critical failure, but you could also roll a 1 after that. So it would only be a negative 1 on top of a 1. So basically it's
Hmm.
just like a net 0. So it could be not that bad either. I've yet to see where sort of some of those rolls will work out narratively, mostly because the narrative is not really super in my control. It's just kind of a more traditional role-playing game where the GM kind of has the wheels on the story, and you're just kind of going along for the ride. But yeah, we're still sort of just feeling it out. I think the others might have played in this system before. For me, it's the first time, but yeah, I'm kind of getting those like traditional old school game feel, because this is an older system. Right, this game has been around. Cyberpunk has been around since the 80s, the early 80s, I believe. And this would be technically like the fourth edition, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
And apparently, the designer, I forget his name, but he's been around for a while, has really, unlike some other games, has really taken the liberty to totally like upend the story and the world in between the various editions. So I think that's kind of the most interesting aspect of it, is that some things from previous editions have totally changed story wise. So there's a interesting world building there, like
I mean,
really, really strong world building.
is the story interesting so far? I assume you're playing like an authored campaign.
I don't know if we are playing an authored campaign. Generally, the GM we play with, he's a really experienced guy, Paul. Usually, just comes up with these scenarios himself.
Okay.
So far, it's very interesting, but not something that would be out of place in a game like Cyberpunk 2077. Except in 2077, you don't often play with a big party, right? It's usually just you, maybe a couple of other characters. But it's rarely do you have a sort of a posse with you. And in this case, we have like a shared vehicle, we have a shared ride, and we're sort of like been thrust together as a new crew. So we're trying to build a rep for ourselves. So there are slightly different considerations than the video game, but because I have that experience playing the video game, I do feel like I know the sort of the feel of the world, and I know even the geography of the city has surprisingly helped quite a bit. Yeah, so I'm enjoying it so far. So potentially more to report in the future.
Very cool. Okay.
All right, should we leave it there for our playlist?
Let's bring this home. So, do we want to announce what we're covering next episode?
Yeah, so we sort of started explaining it, but a bit of a change from what a surprise dropped on you a couple of episodes ago. But we won't be doing Lasers and Feelings, the one-shot role-playing game. We're going to be doing a board game, a newer board game, one that you and I both own and we played recently, played just yesterday. It's called, what is it officially called? You were saying that it's got a bit of a
Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth. So, Lord of the Rings Duel, or basically the new Lord of the Rings reskin of Seven Wonders Duel, by whatever name you call it. So, we've talked a little bit about Seven Wonders Duel previously. I think we talked about that whole series of games, one of my favorite games, but very curious to talk about how this changes things up. I love it. I mean, you can see I've got a whole shelf behind me here dedicated to Lord of the Rings, so very much that's in my wheelhouse as well. So, yeah, lots to talk about there.
All right, so let's, if you're interested, play along. Tell us what you think. Give us some feedback by what various channels do we have, Daniel?
Yeah, well, you can contact us and join the club at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or omnigamers.club. You can also find us on Blue Sky. We have an official account on there, but you can follow me individually at Board Game Feast on Blue Sky and Instagram and most places.
Yep, and you can find me as OmniGamerMark on those same places. Definitely not on X, though.
Say because... X to X.
Exactly, goodbye. That dumpster fire. But you can follow us on YouTube as well, because we post videos every time the audio podcast goes out. So like and subscribe us there if you have not yet. And we'd love to see your comments and questions there also. So tell us about Lord of the Rings Duel, Seven Wonders Duel, if you played that before, any questions you have, or your thoughts on any of the games that we talked about this episode. Okay, so shall we leave it there until next time?
Yes, yeah. So remember to have a balanced diet of gaming. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Mark.
Bye.
Bye.